So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Professor Brunella, for this invitation. I'm gonna talk about, Professor, may I share my screen? I can't do it.
Yes, let me turn you into the relay, into the speaker. Okay, now you should be able to share your screen. Okay, perfect.
Wonderful.
Position brought for the new space area. Fantastic.
So it's a pleasure to be with all of you here. And we are going to talk about how I'm conducting my research about space governance, about a viable system model approach for the new space era as a cybernetic reading. So what happens to space governance when private firms produce identity faster than the state is hosting them? This is just a provocation. I'm just sharing a question here. We are going to discuss about this transition that might be happening in the space agenda, about viability. What does it mean? What does it mean for a space organization nowadays to be viable? Are they viable, right? So I'm going to briefly comment this shift, one of the possibilities to read this recursion happening. It's a discussion that I've been in touch with John before. We were discussing about it, and a snapshot, something like a brief diagnosis. So I live here in São José dos Campos, São Paulo, Southeast Brazil. I'm studying at the Aeronautics Technological Institute. And it's a city embedded in the aerospace environment. It's the city where Embraer is located, the Brazilian aircraft manufacturer. Actually, the founder of Embraer studied at ITA, where I'm studying. It was in the 50s that ITA was created. The founder of Embraer studied there in the 60s. Embraer was created in the 70s. Here's a picture of the National Institute of Space Research, also in my city. This is a picture of São José. I live nearby this region here at right. So the city has this background regarding rockets, airplanes. This is the environment where I'm living, where I was born. So going to space, if we have a view about, for example, the space shuttle, we are going to discuss how it was structured, who was doing what back in these times, and nowadays, for example, what is happening in what is called the new space. The new space is mainly described in literature as the commercialization of space activities. There are different consequences to it, but the main description that we found in the literature is about the commercialization of space activities. So what is happening? The cost of space flight and the impact that SpaceX is doing is massive. If we take a look here, for example, from Soyuz or the space shuttle, the cost to launch any payload, the cost per kilo was about $25,000, and now with Starship could reach about $200. But even nowadays with Falcon, it's about Falcon 9, it's about 1,600. So this scale of how much this cost is decreasing is impressive, and also how competitive those industries are. And another topic about that makes space even harder as an industry, is that we have also insurance related to launch any payload in orbit. So it's not a matter that only SpaceX is cheaper, but the insurance associated also has an important impact. Another topic that's being discussed is about space sustainability. This is a picture to give an idea of the amount of objects orbiting Earth. And I'm gonna share which kind of orbit, which kind of altitude is becoming worst. So a bit of orbital mechanics that depends. The orbital mechanics might be, for example, understood by inclination, by shape, by altitude. Low Earth orbit is the main challenge regarding space sustainability, from 106 up to 2,000 kilometers. We have the median Earth orbit, and we have geostationary orbit that are less complicated, I would say, in terms of space sustainability. So the evolution of objects in orbit is increasing at a great speed. Just to give an idea, the International Space Station is flying about 400 kilometers. And this is the region in low Earth orbit that you have the main distribution of active payload. So this is where the problem is for space sustainability. The amount of objects, artifacts, of remaining components of rockets orbiting Earth. This is the main issue. So when we think in the back that time of space shuttle, who was doing what was, I think, much clearer. For example, NASA, as a space agents, was issuing a call for tenders. Companies like Lockheed could respond to the call of tenders. Work was performed, and the revenue, how it was receiving your money was more was completely consistent how the program was evolving. But nowadays, when we think about SpaceX, the business model is correlated to how the business is funded by private investors. This company is creating a new market, or if we think about internet, with Starlink nowadays. So the technology develops, so it's all interrelated. It becomes like a network. We don't have clarity of who's doing what, what's the role of the space agents, how is the space agent support, what's the role of the government, and this room that the space private companies are gaining is a lot. So from old space to new space, from state-led missions to private platforms, we have at least those two different eras. So operators, the space agents, they were operating launchers and the space missions. The business model based on milestones payments. The market, we always had in the defense in space and government, and there was a very limited commercial layer. Now, in the new space, the literature, they agree that after the 2000s, so the private firms are operating platforms like the International Space Station. 3 years from now, might be not be operating anymore. So there are private companies doing their own. China is developing, launch their own International Space Station also. So this business model has a huge influence of private capital. This market is $600 billion big, and the projections are in about 10 years from now, it might reach $1 trillion. And the recursion levels for a discussion we had before very clearly the United Nations, the outer space treaty signed in 67. In this treaty, countries were saying space is for all, is for the benefit of all humankind, for peaceful purpose. So you had the state signed, you have the agents like NASA and the others, and you have the industry below it. So firms were hired by the states. We might have a vision of a liberalization phase before the new space. And it seems that those treaties, they were freezing, and the state was starting changing this relationship up. Then we were able to reach the new space that we have countries making unilateral, we call soft laws in space. Before we had the Outer Space Treaty signed by countries and UN. Now you have something like the Artemis Agreement made by the US, and your allies are signing it in this arena of state cooperation. And the UN, when we think about space sustainability, UN, for example, 4 years ago, launched a resolution about space sustainability, and countries might be in accordance with, but it's not a law. It's like a guideline, best practice for space sustainability, but there's no resolution about as a law about space sustainability. If a country may or not launch 1 million satellites, 10,000 satellites, it's up to the country to decide and regulate its own industry. So they state, I will make an example here of the US. You have 8 different agencies regulating space activities in US. Globally, radio frequency is regulated because otherwise you wouldn't be able to communicate and receive data from your own satellite. So there is this is a topic that is settled in the world about telecommunications. So before launching, you need to have this, I would say, license. The role that agencies are doing and the increasing impact and the power of private companies. I'll make a comparison between apples and oranges, but just to need an idea of the order of magnitude of the size. This year, SpaceX budget revenue, it will be the same amount of NASA's budget. So just to understand how much those companies are increasing in size. And now also for our discussion, when we compare or we discuss about the old space and the new space taking a VSM lenses, we had national missions like the Apollo program. Nowadays, you have corporate missions articulating this identity, and it is for our discussion, like Artemis. I think before what happened this year with Artemis 2, maybe this space agenda was more confined to the experts, to the industry, but after flying over moon and come back to Earth with the astronauts, it's been spread in the news, and it's become a popular topic even more, right? So in terms of intelligence, the private capacity, who owns this data? No. In terms of monitoring, you don't have a global entity in charge of it, for example, about sustainability. In terms of control, I mentioned here what US is doing, regulating its own industry regarding sustainability, about deorbiting, so about safety, coordination. So before, for example, US was cooperating with Russia and the International Space Agency. Now, these industry-led protocols are emerging alongside slow interstate mechanisms. And in terms of operations, now 80% of the events happening in the new space are private operators doing it. So this is a snapshot for our discussion about what is happening in the new space ecosystem in terms of sustainability, commercialization of space, and how it's changing and I think it brings several challenges and interesting topics for us to discuss about viability, about sustainability. So this is a snapshot of the topics that I'm conducting my research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very intense and very original. Okay, we can start with questions. Angela, you want to start?
Yes. Bruno, is fascinating the research that you are doing, and I guess that for many of us, this is a totally new field, and very likely a field that we haven't sit down and think about because it's so far away from us that difficult to really imagine the complexity of the field. So I have too many questions, but let's start with just a few.
Yeah.
Based on my ignorance of space research by my understanding of the VSM and the way that you are trying to apply it. Yeah, I guess that if you are trying to use the VSM to think about the space governance, the most obvious question is how would you define, imagine that you could create a better system for space governance? How do you imagine that system to be? How would you think if we designed a system, a better system for space governance, what will it have? What will be the consequences?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about the VSM, how do you imagine that such a system could be designed?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Angela. I'm thinking about a national level. For example, my next paper will be about a comparison between Italy, Brazil, and US. And think about the national level. My hypothesis, it seems that a lot of topics are emerging, and we haven't talked about here about militarization of space. That's a very important topic also. But you have commercialization of space, you have militarization of space, space sustainability. A lot of topics are emerging, and countries like Brazil and Italy are using their own space law for the country. It's not a international law signed by. It's a unilateral movement that countries are doing. Influenced by the Artemis Agreement, influenced somehow also by the Outer Space Treaty. So what I hope to reach in this research, Professor Angela, is something about, okay, if taking Stafford Beer, right, about the purpose of a system, it's what the system does, what are those systems doing, right? Are they lacking identity? What are the national priorities? Is a space like the project that Stafford Beer did in Chile, that where I learned that with you, Professor Angela, during your course, that he was taking people and put into S5. It wasn't the government, so it was for the people. So where are the people in those space discussions? Where we are considering that we are doing this for what? What are we doing? Who should be in charge of space sustainability, right? About space commercialization. So my 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 objective, my thesis is to have a view of the past, understand what is happening, understand these pathologies, and discuss future possibilities, future scenarios based in this history, based in these agreements signed. So what happened in the past has consequences for the future, for example, in terms of space cooperation. There are some limitations nowadays due to the geopolitical agenda influencing also the space agenda. So I think my goal would be to discuss how those national programs could be or become more viable, maybe,
Great.
right?
Okay,
Could be
so
an outcome.
let's go to a second question. So one way you can progress to study the viability the, let's say, the space governance, the way of developing a system of governance for the space is as you are doing, analyzing different levels of recursion. And I completely agree with you, the way that you are doing, trying to think about national level, no, international level, what will be the levels of recursion. And you already seem to have been reaching some interesting agreements by seeing the historical development of things and noticing that while in the past, originally in the old space, as you call, there was a kind of national government that was creating some sort of governance by creating some laws and regulations and basically allowing private companies to bid for projects and to develop the projects. That has changed, and now we have a situation in which the state the agencies are private, are multinational. They don't depend on the regulations of one particular country, or not always, as it looks to be. So there are corporations that are private and are the ones that are sort of dominating the market. The market is being more evolving bottom up through private companies capable of doing research and developing new projects. So in that respect, this seems to be interesting that you can do the analysis of a particular country like Brazil and Italy, and you can compare two case studies. I think that's enormously fruitful because it's practical, down to earth, and then you can learn from the comparison, things that are there, things that are not there. But it is always going to be the biggest question: how can you generate agreements at the international level that will represent the voice of the people, as you were saying, referring to the CyberSyn project? Where is the people? How do you think that it will be possible to create some kind of, I don't know, a citizens' assemblies, or to give some voice to the people of the planet and not only to the private companies that are just competing in the market for space benefits, for financial benefits?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, Professor Angela. For example, in Italy, we have the European Space Agency in charge of this coordination. In Brazil, we are not part of the Latin America and Caribbean Space Agency. So the regions, since they have, for example, in Latin America, now we are sharing borders with our neighbors. If we are taking photos of, for example, the Amazon, could be interest not only for Brazil benefits. So there are a lot of spillovers when we are talking about a region. There is a synergy for them to be working together, like the European Space Agency is doing. These unilateral agreements, like that Artemis Accord, it's changing, I would say, this geography of space cooperation. It's not only in terms of how close you are to your neighbor, but this geopolitical agenda is shaping differently the space ecosystem, and how to translate it into local benefits for your own people, I think becomes more challenging. And for example, Brazil is taking a different direction. There is a state company created last year in charge of commercialization of space activities. It's owned by the Brazilian Air Force, since we have one of the best launch sites in Northeast Brazil. We had 2 launch attempts by a South Korean company called Innospace. I would say renting our launching site for commercial purpose. And my guess now that this relationship somehow would have this involvement of this state-owned company created by the Brazilian government. The US goes into a more private direction than this step that Brazil has taken. And since the 70s, we have the European Space Agency in charge of the space program. And of course, you have the Italian Space Agency and how to make this connection, to be thinking about what Italy is interested in space, what is the role at the European Space Agency. And there's an interesting point about the space agents that I'm learning more during this research is that I thought they had more power. But for example, in terms of signing international agreements, in Brazil, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that is in charge of it. So you need to have this alignment. They should be involved to sign any international agreements, not a duty of the Brazilian Space Agency. In Italy, they have an interministerial committee that is in charge of it. It's not the Italian Space Agency thinking about foreign affairs. So it's how those, I would say, those recursion levels are spread into the space agenda. I think since they were born, the space agency is a good example due to this complexity. They are not in charge also of the military interests, so they should be having a talk, aligning it also. So I think since ever, there is this challenge regarding space agency and the complexity of this space agenda. And that's why it's always challenging to talk about these recursion levels, to understand, okay, but what is, depending the topic, it changes, who is doing what and how they're communicated. And without mentioning algedonic signals that increase this complexity. So sorry for the long answer, Professor Angela, but I'm just sharing information about the amount of variables that we have around the space agenda when we are thinking about a country and how to govern it.
I can imagine that using the VSM in your research may be useful in the sense that it will help you to sort of deal with the complexity of the topics, because the complexity of the topics is enormous. So I guess that trying to use the language of the VSM may help you to understand the nature of the roles that different agents have in terms of state space research, space regulations, space policies, and communication, and so on. Isn't it? Is that are you finding that useful to try to use the VSM in that respect? Tell us a little bit more about your experience.
Okay. It's been very useful, Professor Angela. And a surprise for me, it is how powerful it is to diagnose the pathologies.
Oh, there's a noise.
Yeah.
There's a noise. I don't know. Okay.
Oops. And to identify the pathologies, how powerful it is to make a diagnosis of any space organization, and how precise also. It's very precise. It was a surprise for me. I read in different applications of the VSM, but once I took the data to understand this governance into different countries, that's why I'm bringing this conversation today about identity, because in different countries, it's appearing this challenge regarding identity about, it seems to be missing, and how to have our system for our intelligence. Who should be in charge of it? For what? Without mentioning the challenge of looking for synergies between S1s, how to dump the oscillations that are very frequent nowadays. So the VSM is a full plate. It's a perfect match, I think, to try to understand the governance about space activities in a country or in a region. It's been amazing.
Give us an example of a kind of powerful diagnosis that you have come through by using the VSM in your research.
Okay. For example, in Brazil, there is a division between all the countries, between the civil applications and the military applications. In the 80s, there was a program called the Complete Space Mission, Complete Brazilian Space Mission. So at the end of the 90s, we should have in place low Earth satellites developed in Brazil, and a launching vehicle, a rocket, to put satellites into orbit. So since, let's say, the beginning of the space activity in Brazil, there was this division. The Air Force was in charge of the Brazilian space launcher, and the National Institute of Space Research was in charge of developing the satellites. Due to different reasons, budgetary restrictions, economical crisis, Brazil was able to launch in 1993 the data collecting satellite made by Brazilians, and we developed a Brazilian launcher. We had 3 launch attempts. Unfortunately, the last one, there was a huge accident, killing a lot of professionals, about 21. So it was the past. Now, the Brazilian Space Agency, by law, it's written that it is in charge of coordinating the activities in Brazil, the space activities, and you have the strategic program of space systems run also by the Air Force. And I think the first tension, I wouldn't say conflict, is within the defense itself, because the space activities are not in charge or interest or in benefit of only the Brazilian Air Force. There are a lot of information that are important for the Army, a lot of information that are needed by the Navy. So I think the first conflict or the first question would be, okay, but why the Brazilian Air Force? Shouldn't be something regarding defense, the Ministry of Defense, and how to integrate those activities. Is still conflicting. There's room to capture much more synergies. That's the point that I'm bringing. So since the beginning, and this pattern is repeating in this challenge of integrating the military efforts and the civil efforts in the Brazilian space program.
I can imagine that because this is a new field, no, you are beginning to observe the way that things have emerged, the organizations that have emerged, the laws and agreements that have been emerging. They are not compatible with each other. They are not covering everything. So even at the level, at the national level, you can observe pathologies in the relationship because it's not absolutely clear who should be in charge or how to align the interest of people that are doing space research and people that are doing military research in the space or military use of the space. So I can imagine that these kind of contradictions emerge and have been unresolved as they are not frameworks at the global level that can guide or facilitate things to evolve in a particular way that is promoting the common interest for people in the planet or for different nations. I guess that there is a lot of emptiness in the regulation at the global level. Is it that you are finding?
I think since the Outer Space Treaty, there were other treaties signed by countries, but at least in the last 30 or 25 years, those agreements are not hard laws, and they are soft laws, each country doing their own legislation, or like the Artemis Agreement, your allies signing it. And I think it adds another layer of complexity to understand this ecosystem. And okay, and what should Brazil do? Should we have a new space law in place? Of course, there is room to add other topics, not to be would say a general law, let's say, about space activities. There are topics not to be improved. So that's why it feels like if any country is doing okay, I do mine also. No? It's like a me too strategy. No? You do your space law, I do mine. But for what? How powerful it is? What's the implication for others? And a very interesting topic about space activities, the launcher state is responsible for it. For example, South Korea was launching a rocket here in Northeast Brazil. But in terms, for example, of insurance, up a certain level, the launch state is responsible. It comes from this heritage from the space laws is still in place. And okay, you're fostering your private industry might be growing. Who knows? In X amount of years from now, we have like hopefully our Brazilian SpaceX. But until a certain point, the state is involved. He's responsible. If it hits any country, if damages any city, it's not the company who is responsible alone. So that's why it's even more complicated to understand the new space, because it seems that it's all about SpaceX, it's all about Elon Musk. Yes, they have a role and it's important. Bezos with Amazon, Blue Origin, space tourism. Okay, it's true, it's increasing. But the states they were there and they're still there, and they are playing an important role. But I think internally, to align all those topics, it's challenging. That's why we have 8 different regulators agents in the US doing so. They're dividing it to, I think, to deal with this variety.
I guess that one example that could be interesting to follow, if there had been an agreement at the global level in terms of telecommunication and how to have some standards, protocols, regulations that sort of allow the global telecommunication market to happen. I guess that there may be some examples to follow for space regulations in that respect. I mean, if the telecommunication sector managed to get these international global agreements, there may be a possibility for the space sector to go to do something similar, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. There is room, Professor Angela. And from one side, from the military perspective, if you have 1,000 satellites orbiting Earth, for any reason, might be, for example, for a solar wind damage in your satellite with radiation, let's say by natural causes, damaging your satellites in orbit, might be for defense purpose. You might be shutting down a satellite in order to not be communicating with a specific country, or you might be allowing a communication with a specific country in a situation of war. So an entrepreneur has this power nowadays. A private company has this power, and so from the military perspective, to have this amount of satellites orbiting Earth is in their benefit for defense, brings commercial opportunities, and but there is the Kessler, we call it the Kessler effect about space sustainability, the tragedy of the commons. And if it happens, depending of the scale, to get back to let's say a sustainable situation is very difficult, because in low Earth orbit, for example, we are about 25,000 kilometers per hour. So the amount of energy, that's why it's so difficult to get objects, deorbit objects. It's very costly to launch anything from Earth to reach this speed and to in the amount of debris that are in place. So that's why countries are investing on intelligent satellites for the self-regulating, I would say, satellites. They would deviate. This network itself would be, let's say, more intelligent. Space situation awareness is a business also in terms of monitoring for both sides, from military okay, there's a new satellite in orbit. What is this? For which purpose? And also for commercial ones, very important. They send warnings. You should do a maneuver in your satellite. There is a certain probability that we will be hitting another one, or imagine that we are in the International Space Station flying 27,000 kilometers per hour in this direction, and in the opposite direction, something at 20,500 kilometers per hour hitting you. So any small particle, the damage it does might be lethal, fatal. So there is an important safety issue, mainly for human beings orbiting Earth. So for one side, space sustainability has a purpose for military applications, and for the benefit of humankind, this reading should be different, right? Space is for all. If it's becoming, it will become, I think, more costly and more complex if the situation continue to evolve in the pattern that we're seeing, right? So there's this fight for space sustainability.
Yes,
Brunella,
sorry, Angela.
no, I just wanted to know how much more time do we have, or what is the next stage?
Next stage, I can ask if John has a question, and Daniele. Sure, Daniele has one. I have questions myself, and then we can continue.
Korean, yes, please.
John, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, one or two. Well, I should admit that Bruno and I have discussed this before. So the first question is about the recursions, as we discussed some weeks ago. And you mentioned that there's a Latin American Federation of Space Agencies, which Brazil is not a part of. And so it sounds like there are more levels of recursion in your mapping than you presented in your slides. And I just wondered how your thinking on that is developing. And also down at the lower levels, presumably in the as well as the firms doing the system one stuff down the bottom, there are governmental departments who are building things, and as with the American space program, a lot of that was within the government. So it sounds like there's quite a lot of complication there, which needs mapping. But my question, I mean, that's just a comment for you to take on, and as we've been discussing previously. But my question is that you've mapped two viable systems, and you've gone through the 5 systems and the system 3-star. And I wondered if you'd made any diagnosis of these two, of the old way of doing things and the current way of doing things, because it seems to me that introducing a commercial aspect to this introduces huge amounts of complexity, because they're going to have a completely different agenda to the government. And the government, as you said previously, there's some split between the civil interests and the military interests. And I wondered, now that you've got people like Elon Musk coming in, who's clearly doing a very interesting job putting satellites up and creating communications, and how all that fits together. And it just sounds like there's a very, very interesting diagnosis for a viable system in there. But the main thing I'm interested in is the difference between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things from a VSM point of view.
Mm-hmm. Also, for my surprise, John, the importance of S3-star monitoring. The US capability in doing so is amazing. It's amazing. And also how the legislation and the local regulators are in favor of space sustainability, of tracking satellites in orbit and avoiding collisions. So if we look into the UN resolution and the UN laws, there is room and there is this vacancy about space sustainability. There is this, let's say, this guideline that a lot of countries signed, but there is no downside for them, and they're not it's just let's say a better practice for space sustainability signed by a lot of countries. And as I was digging, trying to understand, make this comparison, and also relation with other countries, how they develop this capability to monitor what is happening. It's amazing. Well done by them. And also, I think in terms of legislation, to be at least 10 or 15 years ahead of other countries are doing. Of course, it's difficult to have visibility on China. India is also doing their homework, increasing as a space power, very promising. But we have less data now. We are less in touch with their space program in terms of research. We have less visibility. But more surprised, John, was as I answered Angela, was about pathologies, and the second one, the importance of S3 star, and also to be communicating with the intelligence, how it is reflecting on your space policy, how you're building your regulators. So I didn't have initially this view on the importance of the monitoring the S3 stars. It was a surprise for me.
Sorry, I don't understand what you say. X? What do you...
S3, the system 3 star for monitoring what is happening in the, let's say, the space environment.
What's the name exactly? I didn't. Exit.
No, S3 stars. No? S3 star.
System 3 star.
X3.
Yeah. No, system 3 star. It's like an additional kind of system 3. System 3 does like regulation and synergies on the systems 1, and system 3 star does sporadic monitoring. Just is a sensor to try to find out how the systems 1 are working. So what he's talking about is the system 3 star that is in this case seems to be absolutely relevant. And
but I'd imagine that the accountability loop, the monitoring directly from 1 to 3 up the as part of the resource bargain would be an equally important part of the problem.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, now I fear we are going more philosophical, Bruno. Daniele, you have a question.
Okay.
Daniele.
Yes, my question. My question can be only philosophical. Can be only a philosophical question. So I will try to be very simple. In my opinion, in this passage that you described from the old space to the new space, and so about the commercialization of space activities, there is a real novelty in the history of capitalism, because for the first time in this history, there is an expropriation without native peoples that inhabit the territory which is exploited. The things I apologize for my English that is not so good. So, but I will try. In the history of capitalism, every novelty is connected to a new expropriation, a new version of the enclosures. But in this case, there are not there is nothing to. It's a very strange case in relationship to the rest of the history of capitalism. And it's a sort of an attempt to build a city without inhabitants, because there is not the possibility to live in space without calculating everything. You explicated how every detail must be calculated. And this lack of native inhabitants is linked to a lack of contingency. So it's something that is very, I don't know how to say it, but it's probably something dangerous, because this new city can control the informations, can control some dynamics on the earth, but this city is completely out of the control of the earth citizens. So there is a very big contradiction. And my question is about that.
Wonderful, Dean. I love this metaphor. I love the way you're conducting your research about cities, and we take it to look into space. If we go back in the Outer Space Treaty from '67, says that space is for all humankind, space is for peaceful purpose. You can do appropriation of any space resource and say, it's mine. So why? No. But if we take for example, the Artemis Agreement, there is a contradiction. It says, we are aligned with the Outer Space Treaty. If you read the documents written, we are aligned, we are following the guidelines of the Outer Space Treaty, and we are dividing the moon into zones. So for example, no, wait a minute. From one side, you're saying it's for all humankind, and in the same law, you are dividing the moon and make appropriation of, for example, helium-3, if you find it to produce energy on the moon. The same for Mars. So which law should I follow, right? I'm reading the Outer Space Agreement, but in the very same documents is dividing the moon into zones, like populating a city, Dani. So there is a paper that I'm writing this year for the International Astronautical Conference about a VSM view on the moon, because they are starting to discuss it. Okay, who will be playing the role of identity? Are you a moon citizen if you are born there? If there is a crime, so how to regulate, let's say, the moon or the low Earth orbit ecosystem, having this view is a very interesting one, and the amount of conflict in it is huge. It's huge. So that is happening, and I totally agree, Danny, with your view about having taken a look on the space ecosystem as a city and how it's organized and how it is happening. Very challenging. Very challenging.
If I can say just another thing, in this space ecosystem, there are only two actors, states and private firms. There are no other actors. And so it's a real representation of the inner capitalism structure. It's almost a projection in the outer space of the actual historical situation in which these two actors are devastating the planet. And so it's something that learn us a lot about the contemporary situation.
And if I may add, the Space Force, for example, UK has a Space Command, US has a Space Force, like the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, they have a Space Force. So this militarization of space is happening. So you might be using the state for, the state might have a view about research for space, or our deep space research, you might have our private industry and the militarization of space. So at least we have those three actors populating it, Danny. I agree with you.
Well, following on the same line, I thought that actually Daniele says there are no natives, but this makes me go, expand on the same metaphor, because what comes to my mind is the myth of the frontier. When the Americans traveled, crossed the whole territory of America, actually they couldn't care less about the natives. Most of the land was empty, was considered to be empty by them, and this is why they could appropriate it. So the myth of the frontier is similar because there was no law. It was typical, the myth of this territory that is something between anarchy, complete anarchy, the law of the strongest, and natural communism of the territory. They could go there because it was nobody's territory. Can you consider this a metaphor? An analogy, not a metaphor, an analogy to see how this anarchy found at last a natural lawfulness. I mean, wouldn't it be natural, natural in the sense of inevitable, that from this initial anarchy, some self-organization, self-regulation could happen necessarily. What do you think? I mean, if the commercial and the military, private agencies and states, as Daniele says, are the only actors. But in any case, these few actors might end up limiting one another's power in the sense of checks and balances. What do you think? How do you imagine? Let's go back to Angela's question. How do we imagine? Can you go science fiction for a second? How can you imagine the evolution of space if it should go, if it can go on the right direction?
Okay. It seems that it needs to be developed as a self-regulating system with, I would say, with intelligence on board of satellites for at least for orbit propagation, in order to not be hitting another satellite. There is a lot of influence of how the international law about the seas, about the oceans was developed. And they take this idea into space. It's a strong agenda. It's an important research agenda, making this comparison. Okay, we had who owned the seas, who owned the Atlantic Ocean, how far is the coast of Brazil, 200, 500, 1,000 kilometers, and why. And for geostationary satellites, you have a position in geo orbits about 35,000 kilometers of altitude. Your satellite is flying at the same angular speed as the Earth. So the UN set up these positions for Brazil, these positions for Colombia, these ones for UK, these ones for Italy, because it's it's above your country, and it's important for telecommunication purpose. So for a very specific type of orbit, the problem, let's say, is settled, is specified. But if we bring this discussion for low Earth orbit, for moon, for asteroids mining, I think there is room for discussion, but it needs to be a regulating system in order to keep existing, in order to remain somehow viable. And the future projections, they think about, okay, it's becoming the moon, for example, will become something like the Mount Everest. That's very hard to climb. It's a dangerous and aggressive environment. Or it's become something like Antarctica. That's also difficult to get there. It's aggressive environment, but has some implications for research, or will be something very, let's say, friendly. But the space environment is very aggressive. It's beautiful when we look into the stars, pictures of the planets, but in terms of radiation, in terms of the variation have in terms of temperature orbiting the Earth, so it's a very aggressive environment. Okay, it's beautiful, but it's very, very aggressive, has a lot of consequence for the human body. It's a topic that being discussed. So for humans, there is a challenge. How does our body adapt to it? There is a downside of staying too long in orbit, but for, let's say, for non-human purpose, there's this discussion. It will look like Antarctica, it will like Mount Everest, or be an amazing place for, let's say, researches, explorations, and scientific development.
Angela.
Thank you. Just a last question following on this really interesting conversation. Bruno, do you think that it will be too much to dream if countries have their own space agents? No. They are beginning to develop the space agencies. Shall then we start thinking about an Earth space agency that will be the one that will be try to pick up the points of view of the citizens of the Earth, not only the governments, not only the corporations, but all of them. Do you think that that is too much to dream? I mean, I'm really interested in Danny's point of view of the how this the space development is ending up in the colonization of the space as it was before, as Brunella and you were saying, with the colonization of new continents where there were no laws, nothing, and the colonizer could go do whatever, with unruled complete colonization. And that's what seems to be happening with the space, isn't it? Is it too dreamy to imagine that someone will have the capability to invite into development of an Earth space agency?
I think it's a great point for discussion, Professor Angela. Somehow the population they put pressure on governments, like in Europe, regarding the use of those resources, for example, by the European Space Agency, and doing what? Like the Sentinel program for monitoring Earth reserves, so and the scientific applications, making this data free and available to the world. So I think UN has this, the European Space Agency has this view, and mainly regarding sustainability. Now, is this data, is this technology used for what? So they are making a clear statement about it. In the US, after the accident with the shuttle, there was a pressure also about the amount of resources being applied, and then the accident happened. Somehow in Brazil, when we had this accident with the Brazilian launcher also, it touched the people, so the topic becomes closer to the population, unfortunately due to an accident, but it's the time when we've seen that the population's voice is somehow heard at the Congress level. I think there is room, Professor. I like your idea to listen and to people's voice, to the need of the countries, and to a continental need, but also thinking about it globally. My guess, just a suggestion for our discussion, should be this role for UN. This was the role that UN should be conducting about space activities. But I've loved your suggestion about Earth Space Agency. Very great.
Yes,
very good.
Could be a good idea for the science fiction side of your thesis.
Yeah. Yes.
I would leave some space for this imagined solution.
Yeah, it's a very nice thought that we could deal with it in space, because we fail totally to deal with it on the planet. And I mean, more and more you're seeing that the whole "Make America Great Again" and England leaving the European Union, all this stuff. And it'd be lovely to think that in the context of the whole planet, and you every time somebody comes back from space, they say you see the planet and it's just this extraordinary, beautiful wholeness, and we've just got to work together. So maybe there is a possibility, but it's a lovely thought.
Can I ask you a naive question? When you say commercialization, but what's the profit? Maybe I don't understand. What's the profit? The immediate profit. You know, Varoufakis is saying we are actually out of capitalism. There's no profit needed, just occupation of territory, neo-feudalism. I don't know, it's just a theory. But can you tell me in a few, now very simply, what's the profit for this big tech, enormously rich people?
Yeah. As I think, for example, the SpaceX announced that they will make an initial public offering, and I think Jeff Bezos, Blue Orange, also did the same. So only about a public offering of the shares owned by the shareholders, the valuation is about $1 trillion. So $1 trillion worth a single company, because once you are making this initial public offering, you're selling your future, not only your current results, right, what is happening right now, but also you're selling like a dream. I'll be able to launch X amount of satellites.
There's no product, just you said.
Yes, but last year, each 2 days, SpaceX was launching a rocket, each 2 days. And as we were seeing in this comparison about the cost per kilo of putting a payload into orbit, it's very difficult to compete with them due to the scale they have. And then it's reusable, at least the first stage. So I would say for them becomes a good business. For other companies, might be an issue of a military interest, because if you're doing a military satellites and you ask, okay, I want to take pictures of my neighborhood. Depending on these international connections, a launching state might say, okay, I will launch it for you or not. So they will deny launching your military satellites. That's why even not being a competitive, so lucrative business, a profitable business, sorry, some countries are incentivized. You have a local industry about launchers in order to put your own satellites into orbit. Or otherwise, it might not happen. So the low Earth orbit space economy, the scale is something important, and as always, the state is one of the main buyers. For some companies, it's very gives a lot of profit. That's very profitable business, and a lot of companies trying to copy that strategy, they struggle. Maybe not being able to sell to their own governments, not able to attract private investors, not able to attract money. So for some, it's a profitable business, but the role of the state, instead of the state doing by its own, it's like a licensing. I'm giving it to the private initiative, because I think for the public perception, it's not a cost, right? It's the private initiative leading the effort, but there's always a cost, right, associated with it.
So this enormous profit is actually aimed at political control and not at selling and buying.
I think there is investment to make this technology more competitive.
The final aim is control, is not.
Yes,
It's
somehow.
not so. The traditional capitalist takes the profit and that's it. But now the profit seems to be an instrument for something else, or not? What do you think?
I think we are seeing the technology moving ahead. This price per kilo of putting objects into orbit is unimaginable. Some years before, if we were saying that below, for example, $10,000 or $5,000 per kilo, nobody would, okay, never. Or to make a CubeSat and having your own CubeSat was unimaginable. So this cost is decreasing, but who is controlling? Who has the components? Who has access to space? Who is regulating it? So I think there is investment to improve the technology in order to be more competitive, and also there is a lot of power, a lot of power surrounding this agenda.
It's not the second. It's not the second. But it's not a byproduct power. It seems to be fine.
But there is also, as I understood before, Bruno, tell me if I'm wrong, there is also a possibility of making a lot of money through space research in terms of new materials that they find in space, in satellites and so on. So there is a cost-benefit traditional kind of business in the sense that those that are pioneering can charge enormous amount of money for materials that they found only in space and that they are extremely unique for technological devices and purposes on Earth. So there is as well that bit, I guess, that telecommunication, new materials, research, and military. So like the income, the things that produce money. No?
Perfect, Professor.
Going to the moon didn't help a lot. They didn't find new materials or new minerals, but of course there's this may be not so bad if they could find.
I think that it seems that for mining purpose, if you find helium-3 in the moon, I think the economic value it has, it's a lot. It's a lot. So we'll be starting between quotes, mining the moon in order to settle there, settle a city, as Danny was bringing for discussion. Mining will be like mining gold, will be maybe the next step about the moon.
And who owns it?
It is an El Dorado, a new El Dorado.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be in Colombia, but in the moon, the new El Dorado.
But Bruno, you were saying that they're actually thinking of splitting the moon up and allocating bits of the moon to different nation states. Is that right?
Yes. The Artemis
states, corporations or not?
No, the Artemis Accords divide them into zones. Now, that's what written in this document. I'm just saying what is written, right? So, but that's a huge topic for discussion.
But the big worry is who is writing the document, who is participating in these international treaties about how to divide the space in the moon. No? This is why, I mean, those that have the economic power will be writing the document, and those that haven't are not allowed to speak. No?
Yeah, and the people with the most money will have the most influence on the writing of the document, which will then favor them so they make even more money, and the loop goes round and round, and that's the situation we're in.
Exactly.
Yeah, going back to what Daniele said about contingency, these migrants that crossed America or the oceans, the pirates were anyone, but now they must be the ones who can afford to occupy the space. So do you think that occupying the moon is even more dangerous than having positions in the space, like satellites in the air? You think it's a greater problem to solve?
For example,
occupying the actual.
Yeah. With humans, and the environment is space environment is very aggressive. and how to get back to Earth if you have any problem is another layer of complexity. Communicating with Earth, you need satellites orbiting the moon in order to have this communication coverage in the moon. Otherwise, you have blind spots, as we had in the Artemis 2 mission. For I think 30 or 40 minutes, there was no communication between the Artemis spaceship and Earth. So the infrastructure needed, only in terms of surveillance, communication, and the logistics involved, is very complex and very costly nowadays. So it increases the complexity, and this safety becomes another. You have another dimension of concern regarding safety, regarding radiation. So it's more complex. It's harder to live there or to have any mission instead of in low Earth orbit. Would be much more difficult and endangered.
Let me ask you another naive question. Do you think that International Space Station, could it be a model for a viable system model, given that it's a contained infrastructure? What do you think, being that it is international?
Yeah, it seems to be a model that won't be replicated anymore. China is launching theirs. Two private companies are developing their own in the US.
And so there are other stations.
China is launching, theirs. Two private companies in US also doing the same. The first complaint that the countries have about it regarding the cost. There are some alternatives, like conducting microgravity experiments in a suborbital flight. And instead of orbiting Earth, you make a suborbital flight about 8 minutes to make experiments in microgravity without people on it. There are alternatives, but the International Space Station model doesn't seem to be replicated anymore. First, I think the geopolitical arena, how it's being divided. For example, we had the US and Russia cooperating. The chances for it to be happening in the future, we don't know, but in the short term, seems not so easy. And the cost also, it's a very costly activity that you have humans orbiting Earth and conducting this kind of experiment. So it seems to be moving from from the International Space Station to private companies, like they're doing in US, doing so. And we are not talking about data centers orbiting Earth. So how this space economy is being shaped is changing also the structure of those international corporations also for space activities. And the geopolitical agenda is always just there, those conflicts. But before we had the Cold War on ground, and you had the space cooperation, let's say, right? Were different, if I may borrow from Daniel, those were different cities. Now it's having the same look. Now, what is happening on the ground is reflecting on space. Before, there was room for scientific cooperation about space, even though we weren't having an agreement on Earth, but there was on space. And nowadays, it seems to be a mirror now what is happening on Earth.
It takes some vision of the future. This is why it's so fascinating, your project, because we are compelled to have this feed forward and forward thinking.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Have you ever thought of doing simulation Are there simulations that might imagine these future assets and this future structuring of this space?
Yeah, I think it's a point that I need somehow, in a very humble way, addressing my research, is to reflect about those future possibilities. First, you have the past, how it's restraining your future possibilities, but also there's room for creativity. There is room for something good to happen, and I need to address it somehow. Could be an initial and humble and small exercise, but should be conducted, like Professor Angela was saying about the Earth space agents. Why not Earth space agents for Latin America to think about, let's say, the Amazon, about sustainability, about water, right? What if we break this water cycle on Earth? We know the consequences of what is happening. So I think it could be one of those very positive scenarios, right? We are now thinking about Earth, on Earth, for Earth's benefit, for our benefit, and taking space technology. So this is it's not in place yet, but if it happens, would be amazing, right? Would be a surprise somehow, and a very positive scenario about space on Earth.
Well, Bruno, this is it sounds to me like a job for the viable system model. The whole aspect of the model.
Yes,
You take the autonomous parts and you bring them together, and you can do a whole lot more by working together and collaborating than you can by working in isolation. And we seem to have lost that vision. That seems to have gone from the planet at the moment. So maybe that's something you could come back for your thesis.
That's the beauty of
it. Know Immanuel Kant's essay on perpetual peace?
I don't know, Professor Brunella.
I'll send you the reference. It's a short essay about the conditions for perpetual peace.
Yeah.
Might be you should write the equivalent for outer space.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? I think there is a big difference between an orbiting space station and a settlement on the moon or on another planets or natural satellite. Because in the first case, the infrastructure will continue to work, exploiting people on the ground of the Earth. So there is a difference because for the moment, if the Marxist theory of living labor is true, so in Marx's opinion, all the profit all the profit, the source of all the profit is living labor. So an orbiting system is only another way to exploit living labor on the Earth. When the situation will be different with real settlements, probably, and the possibility to work on other planets, probably the situation will be very different. But for the moment, it's only another way to exploit living labor on the Earth.
Good, Danny. And this future view about the moon, Mars, as John was asking, okay, but who owns it? And but I think it seems, for example, for mining purpose, this exploitation will be about the same. What they are looking in the short term for the benefits, and then we might have new discoveries. But initially, besides once again the military purpose, there is this economic benefit of, for example, mining the moon, and with a small amount of minerals, the economic value on Earth would be huge, huge, huge. That would pay all the investments and for the next 20 years, just to share an idea of how much value there is, or there are exploring those kind of minerals on the moon or in asteroids. So it's that's why it's exciting to have this discussion, to have these thoughts about those possibilities now. Which direction we'll be going and why? If we want to change it, what should we be doing right now, right? In terms of policies, what should be our space agents doing? What should the UN do? So I think it's important to think some years ahead on those scenarios and get back to where we are right now and start discussing.
So you have an enormous responsibility, Bruno, for humanity.
No, but I'm really glad to take the cybernetics, and I'm using also process theory ontology to have a look on events, the possibilities, and to bring it to a different community. It's very helpful. Those are very powerful.
This is why
theories
should be very communicative in order to have a wider audience.
Yes, and I'm very glad to have this chance to start bringing this kind of knowledge into a different field and establish a communication, right? It could be a first step of discussing cybernetics and process theory in a different domain, but those, I'd say, sciences are there since ever. So how powerful they are, and how to have this ecological view about the space environment is very beautiful, very powerful. And I'm making my humble and small contribution to start this discussion with this beautiful community that we have in cybernetics and regarding process view. So I think it's just a first and humble step, but we should share with others the beauty of cybernetics with other communities.
Conscious and the awareness of the problem. Yeah. Okay, so let's make another appointment in 1 year. Okay, let's see what is happening with your project. Okay, I think we can stop here, and then you'll see the video posted in a few days, and then we can keep discussing by commenting. Okay, thank you so much, Bruno. It was really interesting.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Angela, John, and Daniele. A presto. Thank you.
A presto.
Bye-bye.